This is the story of how the worst decision of my life began to turn into something I never expected. And before I get into it, if you're new here, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me which story you've been missing on this channel. I read every single one. Now, let's go. The moment my motorcycle died, I was exactly 43 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but red dirt, cacti, and the particular kind of silence that makes you aware of every thought you've been running from. The engine coughed twice, almost apologetically, like it felt bad about the timing, and then went completely, humiliatingly quiet. I coasted to the side of the road, put down the kickstand, pulled off my helmet, and just stared at the horizon for a solid minute. The Arizona sky was doing that thing it does in the late afternoon, turning every shade of orange and pink that has no business existing in nature. And I remember thinking, of course it's beautiful right now. I'd been on the road for 2 years, 3 months, and, if we're being precise, 11 days. Not that I was counting. I just have a very good memory for things I pretend not to think about. I had crossed 22 states, slept in 40-something motels, eaten gas station sushi in places that should have taught me better, and successfully convinced myself that movement was the same thing as healing. That if I never stopped long enough to feel the weight of what I'd lost, maybe the weight would eventually forget where I lived. Spoiler, it doesn't work that way. But I was committed to the experiment. The thing about me, and I say this with full awareness of how it sounds, is that I have never had trouble getting people's attention. I walk into a room and something shifts. I've watched it happen enough times to stop being surprised by it and start being almost bored by it. Almost. I'm not going to pretend I don't know I'm attractive, because that would be a lie. And the one thing I refuse to be is a liar. Blonde, green eyes, the kind of mouth that my college roommate once described as criminally unfair. I've used all of it as armor for 2 years. Smile, let them look, leave before it means anything. Clean, simple, safe. What wasn't safe was stopping. What wasn't safe was a town called Seco, Arizona. Population 3,200, according to a sun-faded sign that looked older than the highway itself. What wasn't safe was a mechanic with dark eyes, who looked at me the way people usually look at broken engines, with professional assessment and zero personal investment. Like I was a problem to be diagnosed, not a person to be noticed. I cannot explain to you how completely that short-circuited something in my brain. I stood there in that garage, covered in road dust, and felt, for the first time in 2 years, genuinely off balance. So yes, this is the story of how a dead engine, a stubborn mechanic, and a 15-year-old with the emotional intelligence of someone 3 times her age managed to do what grief counselors, well-meaning friends, and 22 states could not. Make me stop. Make me feel. Make me stay. I'm not saying it was comfortable. I'm not saying I didn't fight it every single step of the way. I'm saying it happened anyway, because some things are stronger than your ability to run from them. And this is exactly how it started. The camper truck that towed me into Seco smelled like dog and beef jerky, and the man driving it talked for 43 miles straight about the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies. I nodded at what felt like appropriate intervals and stared out the window at the desert sliding past, thinking about how, 2 years ago, I had a life with a mortgage, a wife, a daughter who called me Mama Ane and pronounced it like a song. I thought about that for exactly 45 seconds before I shut the door on it. The way you learn to shut doors when keeping them open becomes physically unbearable. The truck radio played something country and slow. The butterflies apparently were having a difficult season. I could relate. Seco announced itself with that sign. Population 3, 200, sun faded to the point of suggestion, and then delivered exactly what it promised. A main street that took 40 seconds to drive through, a diner with a hand-painted menu in the window, a gas station that doubled as a bait shop for reasons I chose not to investigate, and, at the far end, a mechanic's shop with a sign that read, Reyes Auto, in letters that had once been red and were now the color of dried roses. There was a truck up on the lift inside. There was the sound of something being done correctly with tools. The kind of place that exists in every small town and somehow always smells the same. Oil and metal, and the specific competence of people who fix things with their hands. I thanked the butterfly man, grabbed my bag, and walked in like I owned the place. Because that is the only way I know how to walk into anywhere. The first thing I saw was a pair of boots sticking out from under a Ford F-150. The second thing I saw was a teenager sitting on a workbench, eating chips from a bag and reading something on her phone with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb. She looked up at me without urgency. Brown eyes, her mother's jaw, the particular unbothered energy of a 15-year-old who has seen every type of person walk through that door and categorize them all before they finish their first sentence. She looked at me, looked back at her phone, then looked at me again, apparently deciding I was marginally more interesting than whatever she'd been reading. "You the one with the dead Triumph?" she said. Not a question, really. More of a confirmation of existing data. "Word travels fast," I said. She shrugged. "My mom called from the road. You need a form." I filled out the form. The boots under the truck hadn't moved. I slid the form onto the workbench next to the chip bag, and that was when the boots moved. Slowly. With purpose. And Mara Reyes rolled out from under the Ford on a creeper, sat up, and looked at me. I want to be precise about what happened in that moment, because I've replayed it enough times to have the details memorized. She looked at me the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Present, focused, and entirely unmoved by anything other than the information she needed. She took the form, scanned it, said, "Triumph Bonneville, 2019. What happened?" I told her. She nodded twice, said the part would need to be ordered, said it would take 10 to 14 days, said the labor estimate would be ready by morning. Then she stood up, wiped her hands on a cloth tucked into her back pocket, and went back under the truck. That was it. That was the whole interaction. No second glance. No half smile. No micro-expression of appreciation for the fact that I was standing there being objectively a very good-looking person in excellent lighting. Nothing. I stood at that workbench for a full 5 seconds longer than I needed to, which is 4 seconds longer than I have ever stood anywhere waiting for an acknowledgement that wasn't coming. The teenager on the workbench was watching me with the patient, faintly amused expression of someone who had seen this exact thing happen before. "She's always like that," she said, without looking up from her phone. "I'm Tess." "Ain't I said. "Cool name," she said, in the tone people use when they mean it but refuse to make it a whole thing. I decided in that moment that I liked her. I found lodging through Tess, who texted someone while I was still standing there and announced that her great-aunt Dolores had a room in the back of the diner and charged less than the motel in Kingman. I didn't ask how Tess had my situation assessed well enough to know I'd need cheap lodging. She just had. Dolores met me at the diner door with the energy of a woman who had been expecting me specifically and was mildly annoyed it had taken me this long to arrive. She was small, sharp-eyed, somewhere in her late 60s, and she put a plate of enchiladas in front of me before I'd fully sat down. "You eat," she said. It was not a suggestion. The enchiladas were extraordinary. I ate 2 helpings and answered questions about my life with the careful vagueness of someone defusing a different kind of bomb. And Dolores received every deflection with the serenity of a woman who already knew the answers and was simply giving me the courtesy of thinking I was getting away with something. The room in the back was small and clean and had a window that looked out onto the alley, and beyond it, the back wall of Reyes Auto. There was a lamp, a quilt that smelled like cedar, and a silence so complete it felt almost aggressive after 2 years of highway noise. I lay on the bed with my boots still on and stared at the ceiling and did what I always do when I stop moving. I started narrating. Not out loud, just internally. Organizing the data. New city. 10 to 14 days. Same playbook as always. Be charming. Be entertaining. leave them smiling, leave. I'd done it in Flagstaff and Albuquerque and Santa Fe and a dozen places whose names I'd already half forgotten. Seco would be the same. It was fine. It was all completely fine. Except I kept coming back to the moment at the workbench. The non-look. The professional assessment with zero residual interest. I'm not proud of what happened next in my brain. I'll tell you that up front. I'm self-aware enough to know that my ego, at that point, was doing the heavy lifting, and not my better nature. But I lay there in that small clean room in Seco, Arizona, and I thought, I will make her look at me. Not because I wanted her specifically. Not yet. Just because the pattern had never, not once in 2 years, failed to play out the way I expected. And something in me needed to confirm that it still worked. That I still worked. That I was still the person I'd rebuilt myself into. The one who moved through the world light and untouchable, and wanted by everyone and held by no one. I thought about it for 20 minutes before I fell asleep. Outside the window, the desert had gone completely dark, and the stars over Seco were the kind that only exist far from cities, extravagant, indifferent, a little overwhelming if you look at them too long. I didn't look at them too long. I closed my eyes and told myself this was just another stop. Another town that would exist in my rearview mirror in 2 weeks. A minor detour. Nothing more. I was very convincing. I almost believed it. Almost is doing a lot of work in that sentence. But that's the honest version. And honest is the only version I know how to tell anymore. Even when the honest version makes me sound exactly like someone who had no idea what was about to happen to her. And I had absolutely no idea what was about to happen to me. I woke up at 6:15 to the smell of coffee so strong it felt like a personality, and the sound of Dolores already in full operation on the other side of the wall. Pans, radio, the particular rhythm of a woman who has been running a diner for decades and treats 5 a.m. the way other people treat noon. I lay there for a moment in the cedar-smelling quiet and did my usual inventory. Where am I? What day is it? What's the exit strategy? Seco, Arizona. Day 1. 10 to 14 days, give or take. I'd been in tighter spots. I got up, put on my least dusty jacket, and walked through the connecting door into the diner like a person who had somewhere to be, which was technically a lie. But I've always believed in the performance of direction, even when the direction is unclear. Dolores put coffee in front of me before I reached the counter. You sleep? She asked. Enough, I said. She looked at me the way my grandmother used to look at people who said they were fine, with total, comfortable disbelief, and then went back to the grill. The coffee was even better than the enchiladas. I made a note to never tell her that, because she already had enough power in this dynamic. The morning was slow the way small-town mornings are slow, not empty, just unhurried, like the day hasn't decided yet what it wants to be. A few regulars came in, nodded at Dolores, glanced at me with the polite curiosity of people who notice strangers without making it weird. I drank 2 cups of coffee and ate eggs that I didn't order, but that appeared in front of me anyway. And I watched the street outside the window with the specific restless energy of someone whose entire routine has been built around movement, and who is now, suddenly, stationary. Across the street, and down half a block, I could see the front of Reyes Auto. The roll-up door was already open. There was already a truck inside that hadn't been there yesterday. Someone had been there since before I woke up, which meant someone had started their day before 6:15. Which was either admirable or deeply concerning depending on your philosophy. I told myself I wasn't thinking about who that someone was. I was just observing the street. Situational awareness, completely neutral. I gave it until 9 o'clock before I went over. I want to be clear that I had a reason. I needed to know if there was any update on the part's timeline, which was a perfectly legitimate thing to want to know. And the fact that I'd changed my jacket twice before leaving the diner was entirely unrelated to that legitimate purpose. Tess was already there, which surprised me until I remembered it was Saturday. She was crouched next to a Jeep with a flashlight, doing something with focused competence that I didn't understand mechanically, but recognized professionally, the posture of someone who actually knows what they're doing. She looked up when I walked in. "No update on the part yet," she said. "It's 9 a.m., I said. "I know," she said. "I'm just telling you before you ask." I closed my mouth. She went back to the Jeep. From somewhere deeper in the garage came the sound of tools and, faintly, music. Something in Spanish, low and unhurried, that I felt more than heard. Mara appeared from the back bay with the timing of someone who had heard me come in and chosen to finish what she was doing before acknowledging it. She was wearing coveralls with the sleeves pushed up and her dark hair pulled back, and she moved through her own space with the particular ease of someone who has never once felt out of place in their own life. She looked at me. Actually at me this time. Not the assessing glance from yesterday, but a proper, full look, the kind that takes inventory. I felt it land. I also felt the moment it ended, which was approximately 2 seconds later, when she said, "Supplier opens at 10. I'll call then," and turned to write something on the whiteboard mounted next to the tool wall. I stood there. Tess, without looking up from the Jeep, said, "She'll let you know when she knows." "Right," I said. "Great." "You want something to do?" Tess asked. I looked at her. "I'm asking," she said, "because you look like someone who doesn't know what to do with themselves when they're not moving." Which was, frankly, one of the more accurate things a stranger had said to me in recent memory, and I resented it slightly. I stayed. I don't have a better explanation than that. Tess handed me a rag and pointed me toward a shelf of parts that needed to be organized, which was something I could do with my hands while my brain did its own thing, and so I did it. The garage had a specific atmosphere that I noticed in pieces. The radio cycling through songs I half knew, the particular quality of light through the high windows, the easy silence between Tess and her mother that spoke of years of working in the same space. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it was efficient and warm, a shorthand that belonged entirely to them. Once, Mara said something in Spanish and Tess responded in English, and Mara made a sound that was almost a laugh, and I pretended to be very interested in a box of valve caps so that no one would see that I was paying attention. This was, I recognized, a new experience. I am not, as a rule, someone who pretends not to pay attention to things. I am someone who owns her attention and directs it openly and without apology. Something about the atmosphere of that garage made me want to be quieter than I usually am. At 10:15, Mara called the supplier. I was near enough to hear one side of the conversation, professional, unhurried, specific. She knew exactly what she needed and exactly how to ask for it, and there was something in the precision of it that was unexpectedly compelling in a way I didn't immediately have vocabulary for. She hung up, made a note, and came to find me at the parts shelf with the straightforward lack of ceremony that was apparently just how she operated. 12 days, she said, possibly 10 if the shipping cooperates. Okay, I said. You're welcome to stay in Seco, she said. There's not a lot here, but what there is works. It was the most words she'd said to me consecutively, and I was aware, in real time, that I was analyzing the sentence for subtext and finding none. It was a completely sincere, completely impersonal statement of local fact. Thanks, I said. She nodded and went back to work. I stood at the parts shelf for a moment after she walked away, holding a valve cap I had no use for, running a quiet internal diagnostic on what had just happened. The answer was nothing. Nothing had happened. She had given me a factual update in a professional manner and returned to her job, and I was standing there like someone had said something significant when she had, objectively, said nothing significant at all. Tess appeared at my elbow. Lunch is at the diner, she said. Dolores makes pozole on Saturdays. Is that an invitation? I asked. "It's information," she said. "What you do with it is up to you." She said it with the completely straight face of someone who had learned dry humor from a master, and I thought, not for the first time, that 15 had no business being this self-possessed. I put the valve cap down. "Pozole sounds good," I said. Tess nodded once, as if this had been the only reasonable conclusion. Lunch at the diner was louder than breakfast, a few tables full, the particular comfortable chaos of a place that is genuinely the center of a small-town social life. Dolores moved through it with the authority of a conductor. Tess ate quickly and efficiently and read something on her phone, and occasionally offered opinions on the conversations happening around her, with the serene confidence of someone whose contributions are always welcome. I ate the pozole, which was extraordinary, and watched the room, and felt something loosen slightly in my chest that I couldn't name precisely. Not happiness, exactly. More like the temporary absence of the specific tension I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a sound that never turns off. It was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with volume. I noticed it the way you notice when a headache lifts. Mara came in at 12:40, washed her hands at the counter sink, sat 3 stools down from me, and ordered without looking at the menu. Dolores brought her food with the ease of someone who has done this 10,000 times. They exchanged a few sentences in Spanish that I didn't follow. Mara ate with the focused practicality of someone fueling up between tasks. She didn't ignore me. She glanced over once, something close to acknowledgement. But she didn't engage either. She was simply in the same space as me, fully occupied with her own existence, and I found myself doing the thing I'd identified in the garage, paying attention quietly, without making it known. Which was, I will tell you directly, not something I had done in 2 years. In 2 years, I had been many things in many rooms. Quiet and unannounced was not one of them. I walked back to my room that afternoon and sat on the edge of the bed and had a very honest conversation with myself. The honest conversation went like this. Something is different about this, and you know it, and pretending otherwise is a waste of your own time. I didn't know yet what different meant. I wasn't ready to poke at it too directly, but I acknowledged it, which is more than I'd been doing with most things for 27 months. Outside the window, the afternoon light was hitting the back wall of Rhea's auto at an angle that made the old paint look almost warm. From inside, faint and unhurried, came the sound of Spanish radio and tools and someone working steadily through the end of the day. I sat with it for a while. Then I thought, tomorrow I'm going back over there. Not because of the ego thing from last night. Or not only because of that. But because the garage felt like the only place in Seco where something real was happening. And I had not been somewhere real in a very long time. I went back to the garage on Sunday with the world's thinnest excuse. I wanted to ask about the storage for my motorcycle gear, which was currently taking up half of Dolores's back room and which nobody had complained about, meaning there was no actual problem to solve. I knew this. I walked over anyway, helmet bag in hand, rehearsing a completely unnecessary explanation, which is something I have never done in my life. I am not a rehearser. I am an improviser. I walk in, I read the room, I respond. The fact that I was standing outside Rhea's auto at 9:47 on a Sunday morning running lines in my head, like I was auditioning for something, was information I chose, consciously and deliberately, to ignore. The roll-up door was open. The radio was already going. I walked in with my manufactured purpose and found not Mara, but Tess, sitting on the hood of a Subaru eating a granola bar and watching a video on her phone with headphones around her neck in the specific way teenagers wear headphones, available for conversation, but maintaining plausible deniability. She looked up, looked at the helmet bag, looked at me. "Storage question?" she said. "Lucky guess," I said. "Not really," she said. "You had the look of someone who needed a reason to be here." I opened my mouth, closed it. "There's a shelf in the back," she said, and hopped off the Subaru. The shelf in the back was fine. The gear went on it. The excuse evaporated, as excuses do, and I was left standing in the rear bay of Reyes Auto with nothing in my hands, and nowhere to be for 12 days. And Tess watching me with the patient curiosity of someone who had decided I was an interesting problem. "You want to see how the lift works?" she asked. I looked at the hydraulic lift currently holding a Dodge pickup 3 feet off the ground. "Not especially," I said. "That's fine," she said. "Most people who come back here on a Sunday want to see the lift or talk to my mom. Since she's not here, where is she?" It came out faster than I intended. Tess's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes noted the speed of it. "Church," she said. "She goes every Sunday, back by 11. I nodded in a way that I hoped communicated total indifference. Tess ate the last of her granola bar. "You can wait," she said, "or I can show you how to calibrate a tire pressure gauge. Either way." I learned to calibrate a tire pressure gauge. It took 20 minutes and I was genuinely terrible at it in a way that surprised me. I'm usually competent at physical tasks. I have decent hands. I pay attention. But there is apparently a specific feel to it that takes practice, and I had 0 practice. And Tess corrected me 3 times with the patient efficiency of someone who has been doing this since she was old enough to hold the gauge. The 3rd correction involved her actually repositioning my hands, which she did with the matter-of-fact physical directness of a person who grew up in a place where things got fixed with your hands and touch was a neutral, practical language. "There," she said. "Feel the difference?" I did, actually. "Yeah," I said. "Good," she said, and handed me another tire. We worked through 4 of them in a comfortable silence that I noticed because comfortable silences with strangers are not something I collect. I collect conversations. I collect impressions. Silence usually makes me reach for something to fill it. This one, I left alone. Mara came back at 10:53. I know the exact time because I had been, without meaning to, tracking it. She came through the side door in dark jeans and a white shirt with her hair down, and I was under the circumstance of having a tire gauge in my hand and grease on my right thumb, which was not the presentation I would have chosen if I'd been thinking clearly, which clearly I had not been. She stopped when she saw me. Not a dramatic stop, just a brief recalibration, the kind that lasts half a second, and only registers if you're watching for it. I was watching for it. "Anna," she said. "Just my name. Confirmation of presence, like checking a box." "She's learning gauges," Tess said, from under the Subaru, where she had migrated at some point in the last 10 minutes. "Slower than most," she added, and I heard the precise frequency of a joke being made at my expense with genuine affection, which is a very specific thing, and not everyone can do it. "I'm right here," I said. "I know," Tess said. Mara changed into her coveralls with the efficiency of someone who has done it 10,000 times and came to check Tess's work under the Subaru. And I stood at the workbench trying to look like I was doing something useful while actually just being in the room. At some point I picked up a parts catalog that was sitting open and started looking at it, which was absurd because I understand nothing about auto parts, but it gave my hands something to do. The music on the radio shifted to something slower, a woman's voice over guitar, and the morning light through the high windows moved the way light moves in places that are old and sure of themselves. I turned a page in the catalog and read nothing. From under the Subaru came the low, efficient exchange between Mara and Tess. A question, an answer, a follow-up, the sound of something being correctly tightened. Then Mara said something in Spanish that had a specific cadence, and Tess said, "Mom, that's not even grammatically E." And Mara said something else, and Tess made a sound of exasperated affection that is completely universal across every language, and I looked up from the catalog I wasn't reading, and laughed before I could stop myself. They both looked at me, Mara with neutral curiosity. Tess with the satisfied expression of someone whose joke had landed wider than intended. "Sorry," I said. "Don't apologize," Mara said, which was not warm exactly, but not cold either. It was the verbal equivalent of a door that wasn't open but wasn't locked. I filed it. I'm good at filing things. I looked back at the catalog. 3 pages later, I realized I'd been smiling at a diagram of brake components for an undetermined amount of time, which was new information about my current mental state that I chose to table for later examination. The morning continued. Nobody asked me to leave. I didn't leave. Tess taught me the names of 4 tools with the same energy a person uses to teach a tourist basic phrases in a foreign language. Useful, slightly condescending, genuinely kind. I repeated them back. She corrected my pronunciation of torque wrench, which shouldn't have a pronunciation problem, but apparently I was making one. At noon, Tess announced lunch with the authority of someone who sets the schedule, and we walked to the diner in a loose group of 3 that nobody had formally organized. Mara walked slightly ahead, which I understood instinctively was just how she moved through space. Not exclusionary, just self-contained. Tess walked beside me and asked me questions about the road in the specific way teenagers ask questions about things they find genuinely interesting, which is without the social cushioning adults use. Just direct curiosity fired at you like a series of clean throws. Where was I before Arizona? What was the longest I'd ridden in a single day? Had I ever been caught in weather? What was the worst state for roads? I answered all of it. She listened with her whole attention, which is rarer in a 15-year-old than people think. And I found myself giving her real answers instead of the curated ones I usually deploy, which I noticed and found faintly alarming. Over lunch, I made Dolores laugh twice, which I'm noting not out of vanity, but because the sound of it, full and unhurried and completely unperformative, did something pleasant to the atmosphere of the whole room. Mara, across the table, looked up when Dolores laughed. Not at me specifically, just at the source of the sound, the way people do when something genuinely good happens nearby. It lasted a second. Then she went back to her food. I spent the next 4 minutes pretending I hadn't tracked that second down to its last frame. Tess, who misses nothing, was looking at her phone with an expression of total innocence that I did not trust for a moment. Walking back to the garage after lunch, Mara fell into step beside me for approximately half a block. Not intentionally, just the geometry of the sidewalk, and said without preamble, "Tess likes you." "I like her too," I said. "She's perceptive," Mara said. It sounded like a fact and a warning in the same breath, delivered without drama. "I noticed," I said. Mara nodded once. We reached the garage. She went back to work. I stood at the entrance for a moment, that half block of sidewalk already replaying on a loop, analyzing it for everything it contained and everything it withheld, which was a deeply undignified thing to be doing in a garage doorway in Seco, Arizona on a Sunday afternoon, and I did it anyway. I walked back to the diner with grease still on my thumb, and the catalog of things I was pretending not to notice growing longer by the hour. In my room, I sat at the window and looked at the back wall of the garage and thought about the laugh I hadn't been able to stop, and the door that wasn't open but wasn't locked, and the half block of sidewalk, and a woman who moved through her own life with a steadiness I hadn't been around in so long I'd forgotten it was possible to be that still. I thought, this is fine. I'm just observing. This is what happens when you stop moving. You start paying attention to things. It doesn't mean anything. I thought that very firmly. Then I went to sleep and dreamed, for the first time in 2 years, about staying somewhere. I didn't remember the details in the morning, but I woke up with the feeling. Monday morning arrived in Seco the way all mornings arrive in the desert, suddenly, completely, with a quality of light that has no interest in being subtle. I was awake before 6, which is not a thing that happens to me. I am, under normal circumstances, someone who negotiates with consciousness until at least 7:30, who treats the alarm as an opening position in a longer discussion. But I was awake at 5:52, looking at the ceiling, aware of the specific silence of a town that hadn't started yet, and aware, with the slightly uncomfortable clarity that comes from having nothing to distract yourself with, that I had been in Seco for 3 days and had already developed something embarrassingly close to a routine. I knew where the coffee was. I knew which stool at Dolores's counter had the best angle on the street. I knew that Tess got to the garage before school at 7:15 and left at 7:40 and came back at 3:20 with the precision of a person running a schedule she'd designed herself. I knew the radio in the garage switched from news to music at 9. I knew these things because I had been paying attention in a way I had specifically promised myself I wouldn't. I lay there for 8 more minutes, had the brief, internal argument I was apparently going to have with myself every morning, lost it, and got up. Dolores was already behind the counter when I came through the connecting door, which meant she'd been up since before 5:30, which I found both impressive and faintly accusatory. She put coffee in front of me with the timing of someone who had heard my footsteps and started pouring at exactly the right moment. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I said. She said, in the tone that means I know exactly why you couldn't sleep and I'm giving you the courtesy of not saying it. I wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the street. The garage was dark, too early even for Mara. Something about that felt like useful information, though I couldn't have told you what use it was. Dolores moved around the counter with the unhurried authority of her domain, setting up for the morning, and the silence between us was the kind that a certain type of person can sustain without discomfort. Dolores was clearly that type. I was discovering, somewhat to my surprise, that I might be becoming it. She started talking at 6:20. Not abruptly. It was less like beginning a conversation, and more like continuing one that had apparently been running for some time in her head, and she was now allowing me access to. She talked about Seco first, its history, the way it had changed and hadn't changed, the families who'd been there for 3 generations and the ones who'd come and gone. She talked about the diner, which her husband had built, and which she had run alone for 19 years since he died, which she mentioned with the matter-of-fact steadiness of someone who has fully integrated a loss into the architecture of who they are, without letting it become the whole building. I listened. Not performatively. Actually listened. The way you do when someone is telling you something that has a real weight and they're not asking for your reaction, just your presence. Then, without a change in tone or a noticeable transition, she started talking about Mara. She talked about Mara the way people talk about someone they love, with the specific clarity that only comes from having watched that person navigate genuine difficulty. Mara's father, Ernesto, had built Reyes Auto from a single bay and a used lift and 30 years of the kind of work that doesn't make you rich, but makes you essential. He'd died 4 years ago. Heart. Sudden. The kind of loss that doesn't give you time to prepare because there is no preparing for it. Mara had been 26. Tess had been 11. The business had been struggling, and the man who had been Tess's father had already been gone for 3 years by then. Mara had taken all of it. The grief, the business, the solo parenting, the financial pressure, and had done what Dolores described simply as kept going. Not heroically, not without cost. Just with the steady, daily commitment of someone who had decided that the people and the things she loved were worth the effort of continuing. "She doesn't talk about what it cost her," Dolores said, refilling my coffee without asking. "But I've known her since she was smaller than Tess. I know what she carries." She paused, set the pot down. "She doesn't let people close easily. She's not cold. You can see that. She's careful. There's a difference." Another pause. People who are careful got that way for a reason. She looked at me then, directly and without apology. "You take more coffee?" I took more coffee. I also took the next 20 minutes to sit very quietly with what had just been handed to me, which was less a piece of information and more a map. The kind that doesn't tell you where to go, but shows you the terrain clearly enough that you can stop pretending you don't know what you're walking through. I understood, in the way you understand things that arrive sideways rather than head-on, that Dolores had not been telling me about Mara's past as casual local history. She had been telling me with the specific intention of someone who sees 2 people at a certain distance from each other and wants at least one of them to understand what the distance is made of. Whether that was presumptuous of her, I genuinely couldn't decide. What I could decide was that it had worked, and I was sitting on a diner stool at 6:45 in the morning feeling something I hadn't felt in 2 years, which was implicated in someone else's story. Not peripheral. Implicated. It's a different weight. I went to the garage at 9 because by that point not going would have required more energy than going. Tess had already left for school. Mara was alone, halfway into the engine bay of a Chevy Silverado, and the radio was doing its 9 o'clock transition to music, something upbeat in English this time. A woman's voice with too much production on it that the garage's acoustics stripped back to something more honest. I announced myself by knocking on the doorframe, which I'd started doing without thinking about it, and Mara said morning from inside the engine bay without emerging, which I had also started to understand was simply how she operated. She acknowledged you without interrupting what she was doing, which was both efficient and, in a way I hadn't expected, respectful. Like your presence registered as real without needing to be performed at. I found a logical place to be, the workbench, the parts shelf, and occupied it, and we existed in the same space in the easy silence that had apparently become a thing we did now. At 10:30, she emerged from the engine bay to get a different tool, and I said, without planning to, "The business with the offer from the auto network. How serious is it?" She stopped, looked at me with the direct, assessing quality that I was beginning to understand was just her face when she was thinking, not guardedness specifically. "Serious enough," she said. "They want an answer in 2 weeks. What's their offer?" "Enough to pay off the building and have money left," she said. "Enough that turning it down requires a plan." She said it flatly, without self-pity, just the clean shape of a hard situation. I nodded. "Do you want to turn it down?" She looked at me for a moment. "This was my father's," she said. Not an answer, technically, but completely an answer. She picked up the tool she'd come for and went back to the Silverado, and I stood at the workbench and thought about Ernesto Reyes, building something from a single bay and 30 years of showing up, and his daughter standing in the middle of it, refusing to let it become someone else's asset, and something in my chest did a thing I wasn't ready to examine in public. I left at noon with the excuse of lunch, walked back to the diner, sat at the counter, and did something I hadn't done since before the accident. I opened my laptop, which had been living at the bottom of my bag for 8 months, technically functional, practically a time capsule, and I started working. Not the careful, curated thinking I'd been doing in the garage. Actual work, market positioning, local competitor analysis, the specific mechanics of how a small independent shop differentiates itself from a regional chain in a town where everyone already knows everyone. I worked through lunch and into the afternoon, and Dolores brought me food at intervals without comment, and refilled my coffee with the serenity of a woman who approves of what she's seeing, and is wise enough not to say so. By 4 o'clock, I had the beginning of something real. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. The more honest answer is that I knew exactly what I was going to do with it, and I was giving myself the courtesy of a short delay before admitting it. Tess came in at 3:40, school bag over one shoulder, and sat at the counter 2 stools down and ordered a soda, and looked at my laptop screen with the unembarrassed directness of a teenager who doesn't recognize other people's screens as private. "That's our garage," she said. It wasn't a question. I'd used the name in the header of the document. "Preliminary analysis," I said. "Of what?" "Of why people should be coming to Reyes Auto instead of the new place on Route 66. She was quiet for a moment, reading what was visible on the screen with a speed that told me she was actually processing it, not just scanning. "Does my mom know you're doing this?" "Not yet," I said. She looked at me. "She won't like that you did it without asking," she said. "I know," I said. "She also won't throw it away," Tess said, and picked up her soda. There was a quality to the way she said it. Not reassurance exactly, more like data, offered neutrally from someone with better information than me. I appreciated it the way you appreciate a weather report that turns out to be accurate. Dinner that night was the first time I sat at a table with both of them. Not by design. Dolores seated us that way with the cheerful authority of someone who arranges things and allows other people to believe it happened naturally. Mara arrived after closing up the garage, sat across from me, and accepted this arrangement with the same equanimity she appeared to bring to everything. The conversation was mostly Tess, who had opinions about her history teacher, her school's scheduling system, and a documentary she'd watched the previous night that had apparently made several factual errors she found personally offensive. Mara listened to all of it with the particular focused quality of a parent who finds their child genuinely interesting. Not the performed interest of obligation, but the real thing, which is different and visible. I mostly watched. Occasionally, Tess pulled me into the conversation with a question or a reference to something I'd mentioned earlier in the day, and Mara's eyes would move to me when I answered, and I would answer and feel the attention like something physical, and then the conversation would move on, and I would have approximately 4 seconds to compose myself before the next thing happened. Walking back to the garage after dinner, under a sky that was doing its extravagant thing again, Mara said without looking at me, "Tess says you were a strategist, before." "Marketing strategy," I said. "Brand positioning, market analysis." "Yeah." "Before you left," she said. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just the acknowledgement of a fact she'd assembled from available information. "Before I left," I confirmed. She nodded. We reached the garage. She unlocked the side door, paused with her hand on it, looked at me with the dark, direct quality that I was beginning to understand was the closest thing she had to an open door. "Good night, Annie," she said. My name in her mouth had a weight I hadn't anticipated and couldn't account for. "Good night," I said. She went in. I stood outside for a moment in the dark, in the warm Arizona night, under the indifferent stars. Then I went back to the diner, sat on the edge of my bed, and said out loud, to nobody, in the small, clean room that smelled like cedar, "I'm in trouble." It was the first completely honest thing I'd said without an audience in 2 years. The room didn't respond, but it didn't need to. I already knew. I printed the analysis at 7:15 Tuesday morning on Dolores's ancient inkjet printer, which protested the request with the mechanical outrage of equipment being asked to do something it had not done in months. It took 11 minutes and made a sound like a small animal in distress, and Dolores watched the whole process from behind the counter with an expression of profound amusement that she was decent enough to keep mostly to herself. The document came out slightly skewed on every page, the margins uneven, the font rendering with the specific imperfection of old cartridges running low. I straightened the pages against the counter, paper-clipped them in the upper left corner with a clip I found in a jar next to the register, and told myself, for the 4th time that morning, that I was doing this because I had nothing else to do and a useful skill and a concrete problem in front of me, and that was the entirety of the explanation. It was a clean, functional reason. It had nothing to do with dark eyes, or the way a name sounded in a certain voice, or the increasingly inconvenient fact that I had started waking up before 6 every morning without an alarm, which had never once happened to me in the previous 28 years of my existence. Nothing to do with any of that. I picked up the document, walked to the garage. Dolores behind me said nothing. She didn't have to. Mara was alone. Tess had school. Tuesday, no early arrival. And the garage had the particular quality it got before 9, before the radio shifted, when it was just the light through the high windows and the sound of someone working with total concentration in a space that belonged to them completely. I stood in the doorway for a moment before she noticed me, which I'm mentioning not because it's dramatic, but because it was one of those involuntary pauses that the body makes when it's ahead of the brain. When something in you registers this, before you've finished deciding what this is. She was at the back workbench, doing something careful and precise with a component I didn't recognize, and she had her hair down, and the coveralls on, and the radio was still on news, and the whole scene had a quality of completeness to it, like a thing that didn't need anything added. Then she looked up and saw me, and the completeness shifted slightly, and I walked in before I could overthink the shift. I put the document on the workbench without ceremony, to the side of what she was working on, not on top of it, because I had enough spatial awareness to understand that you don't interrupt someone's work. You place yourself adjacent to it and wait. I did some analysis, I said, on the garage, on the offer and why you might not have to take it. She looked at the document, looked at me. The expression was the one I'd started to be able to read, the one that wasn't closed but wasn't open either, that lived in the precise and careful middle of someone who processes things before they respond to them. You did this without asking me, she said. Not hostile, observational, like noting a fact about the weather. Yes, I said. Why? And there it was, the question I had prepared 3 different answers for, none of which were entirely true, and which I was now standing in front of, with the increasing awareness that she would know the difference between a true answer and a managed one, because she was exactly the kind of person who would know that. I picked the answer that was truest, without being the whole truth. Because the problem was clear, and I had the skills and the time, I said. And because I didn't want to ask, and have you say no before you'd seen it. A pause. That's a little arrogant, she said. Yes, I said. She picked up the document. She read it the way she did everything, with full attention, without performance. She didn't react while she was reading, didn't make the small sounds of engagement or concern that most people make to signal that they're following along. She just read, turned pages, read more. I leaned against the opposite workbench and watched the garage and pretended I wasn't counting the seconds. The radio went through 2 full segments of local news. A car went by on the street outside with bass-heavy music that faded as fast as it arrived. A bird, I didn't know enough about Arizona birds to know which kind, landed on the window ledge, considered the interior of the garage, and departed. Mara turned the last page. Set the document down with the pages aligned, which I noticed and which told me something, though I couldn't have articulated exactly what. She looked at me. The niche service angle, she said. The mobile diagnostics for rural properties. There are 11 ranches within 20 miles, I said. The chain on Route 66 doesn't do on-site. You could. She was quiet for a moment. That would need a second vehicle, she said. A used van, I said. Less than 8,000. I ran the numbers on page 4. She looked at page 4, looked up. You ran acquisition costs, she said, with the tone of someone confirming something that surprised them slightly. I worked in strategy for 6 years, I said. Old habits. The silence that followed was the kind I'd learned to read as processing rather than rejection. The specific quiet of someone who is taking something seriously enough to think about it before they speak. I waited in it without filling it, which was, again, not something I would have recognized as remarkable 3 weeks ago. Mara set the document down again, precisely, and said, Why do you want to help us? And there was the version of the question I hadn't prepared for. Because us was doing different work than me would have done, and she knew that, and had chosen the word deliberately, and I was standing in front of it with exactly nowhere to hide. I looked at the document on the workbench, the skewed margins and the low cartridge font and the paperclip I'd found in a jar. The 11 pages I'd built out of a skill I'd stopped using and a problem that had nothing to do with me, and an honesty I hadn't been ready for when I woke up that morning and was apparently ready for now, standing in this garage, in this light, in front of this woman who asked questions like she already knew the answer and just wanted to see if you'd say it true. Because it matters, I said. This place matters. What your father built here matters. And I stopped. Started again. I haven't done anything that mattered in 2 years, I said. And I remembered what it felt like. It was the most I'd said in one direction in a very long time, and the words sat there in the space between us, and I didn't take them back, and she didn't look away. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she picked up the document, tucked it under her arm, and said, "I'll read it properly tonight." Which was not thank you, and not yes, and not any of the things I might have projected onto the moment. It was the honest, specific thing she meant, delivered without ornament, and somehow that was more than the decorated version would have been. She went back to her workbench. I stayed for a while longer, doing the things I'd started doing without being asked, organizing, labeling, making myself useful in the small and physical ways that Tess had taught me, and that I had discovered I didn't hate. At 11, Mara looked up from her work and said, without preamble, "There's a ranch owner, comes in every 3 months, drives 40 minutes each way. I've thought about the on-site thing before." "What stopped you?" I asked. She considered it. "Same thing that stops most things," she said. "Not enough time to think past the immediate problem." I nodded. "That's what I'm for," I said, and then realized how that sounded, and started to walk it back, and she said, very quietly, almost to herself, "Maybe." Just that. One word. Maybe. I filed it under things I was pretending not to examine, right next to everything else in that category, which was getting crowded. Tess arrived at 3:20 with the schedule precision I'd come to rely on, dropped her bag, changed into work clothes with the practiced speed of someone who'd been doing it for years, and came to find me at the parts shelf where I'd been doing a genuinely useful reorganization that I could justify on its own merits regardless of everything else. She looked at the shelf, looked at me. "Mom showed me the document," she said. "She read it at lunch." "She said she'd read it tonight," I said. "She says that," Tess said, picking up a box of washers and putting them where they actually went, "when she wants to think about something without you watching her think about it." I absorbed this. "She read all of it?" "Made notes in the margins," Tess said, in the tone of someone delivering significant intelligence with intentional casualness. "In pen." I looked at the shelf I was organizing and felt something warm move through my chest in a way I absolutely refused to acknowledge in front of a 15-year-old. "Good notes or bad notes?" I asked. Tess shrugged. "She uses pen for both," she said. "But she was at the kitchen table, not the desk." A pause. "She only uses the kitchen table for things she's actually considering." I looked at her. She looked back at me with the serene patience of someone who has said exactly what they intended to say and is waiting for the information to land. It landed. Dinner that night was louder and easier than the night before. Dolores had apparently decided we were now a regular table, which meant the 4 of us plus whatever opinions the other regulars chose to contribute from neighboring tables, which in a diner in a small town means quite a few. A man named Gerald, who farmed something I didn't catch, spent 10 minutes debating the merits of a local mechanic versus the chain on Route 66, with the conviction of someone who had been waiting for an audience for this particular opinion. Mara listened to him with the focused patience she brought to everything and said, at the end, "You make a good case, Gerald." He beamed. I caught Mara's eye across the table and saw, for the first time, something I could only describe as a shared frequency. The slight, precise acknowledgement between 2 people who have understood the same thing at the same time. It lasted a second. She looked away. I looked at my food and thought, there it is. There was the thing I hadn't had vocabulary for in the garage on Sunday morning. There it was. After dinner, I walked back to the diner alone. Mara had stayed to talk to Gerald about something. Tess had gone home. And I sat at the counter and Dolores put decaf in front of me, which told me she'd noticed I'd been sleeping badly, which meant she was paying closer attention than I'd been crediting her for, which should not have surprised me. "She read it at lunch," I said. Dolores said nothing, just wiped the counter. "With a pen," I said. Dolores said. Kitchen table, I said. Dolores set the cloth down, looked at me with the warm, direct gaze of someone who has been patient and is about to stop being patient. Anne, she said. Yes? What are you afraid of? She said it the way she said everything, without drama, without softness, as a straight question that deserved a straight answer. I looked at the coffee. The thing about Dolores was that she asked questions that already had your answer in them, and she just needed you to hear yourself say it out loud. That it ends, I said. That I stopped. Started again. That I get attached to something and it ends. She nodded, picked up the cloth again. Most things end, she said. Doesn't mean you should skip the middle. She went back to wiping the counter. The decaf was perfect. The diner was warm. Outside, the Arizona night was doing its enormous, indifferent thing. And somewhere 2 blocks over, a woman was sitting at a kitchen table with a document I'd printed on a broken inkjet, reading with a pen. And I was here, in the middle, terrified and present, and unable to make myself move toward the exit. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't try. Wednesday arrived with a dust advisory and the particular dry heat that the desert produces in late morning, like a second atmosphere settling over the first. I know this because I was already at the garage by 8:30, which at this point required no justification from either of us. I showed up. I was useful in the specific ways I'd learned to be useful, and Mara had stopped asking why I was there, which I understood as a form of acceptance that meant more than an explicit invitation would have. Tess was at school. The garage had its morning quality. The light, the radio on news, the sound of purposeful work. And I was reorganizing the invoicing system, which I had identified 3 days ago as a disaster, and had been given tacit permission to address when Mara had said, upon my mentioning it, "If you can make sense of it, be my guest," in the tone of someone who has looked at a problem too long to see it clearly anymore. The invoicing system was indeed a disaster. Paper files mixed with digital records mixed with a whiteboard system that had its own internal logic, but didn't communicate with either of the others. I was building a bridge between all three, which was satisfying in the clean, uncomplicated way that organizational problems are satisfying. Clear inputs, measurable outputs, no emotional variables. The emotional variables were elsewhere in the room. Mara had been different since Tuesday. Not dramatically different. Nothing about Mara was dramatic. But different in the way that things shift when a door that was latched gets unlatched. Not open, just unlatched. She had referenced the document twice in the morning, practically and specifically. Once to ask about the cost modeling on the van acquisition. Once to say she'd called the ranch owner, Gerald's neighbor, who had expressed interest in on-site diagnostics. Both times she'd delivered the information with the directness of someone who has decided that something is worth pursuing and is now in execution mode. Both times I'd responded with matching practicality, because I understood instinctively that this was the language she trusted. Not enthusiasm, not warmth performed for its own sake, but the solid, functional engagement with things that are real. It was not a language I'd been using much in the last 2 years. I found I still knew it. More than that, I found I'd missed it. The way you miss a room in a house you used to live in. A room you didn't think about until you walked back into it. By 7 in the evening, Tess had gone home after dinner. Homework, she said, with the specific resignation of someone who respects the necessity of a thing without enjoying it. And Dolores had closed the diner, and the street outside had gone to the quiet that Secco does after 8, which is a complete and comfortable quiet. The kind that doesn't feel like absence, but like the town exhaling. Mara was still in the garage. I knew because the light was still on. I could see it from the diner window, where I'd been sitting with my laptop for an hour, doing the work that had no deadline, except my own sense of wanting it to be right. I closed the laptop. Told myself I was going to check one thing about the invoicing system. Walked to the garage with the practiced absence of self-examination that I was deploying more and more as a survival strategy in Seco, Arizona. The side door was unlocked. I knocked anyway. In here, Mara said. She was at the back workbench under good light, doing something detailed with a carburetor. The kind of work that requires clean hands and full attention and a specific patience. She'd changed out of the coveralls into jeans and a worn flannel that looked like it had been washed 300 times and had arrived, through that process, at the perfect version of itself. Her hair was down. The radio was off. Without it, the garage had a different quality. More interior, more present, like the room had been waiting for the noise to stop. I sat on the stool near the workbench. My stool, I'd started thinking of it, which was information I kept strictly to myself, and looked at the carburetor and said, "The ranch owner called back. This afternoon," she said. "He wants to set up a trial. 2 visits, see how it goes." "That's good," I said. "Yes," she said. And then, because the room was quiet and the hour was late and something had shifted in the atmospheric pressure of the last 3 days, she said, "It's good. Thank you." Not the professional acknowledgement of Tuesday. Something different. Something that came from further inside, carried without armor, offered directly. I felt it land exactly where she aimed it. "You did the work," I said. "I just named the problem." She looked at me for a moment. "You named it in 11 pages with cost modeling," she said. "That's more than naming." I almost said something light, something deflecting. The version of me from 2 years ago would have. The version of me from last week probably would have. I said, "I wanted to." The conversation that followed was the kind that starts in one place and ends somewhere else entirely, following the logic of 2 people who have been careful with each other for days and are now, in the particular privacy of a late evening in an empty garage, slightly less careful. We talked about the business first, the plan, the timeline, the realistic expectations. Then about Seiko, which Mara talked about with the specific affection of someone who has chosen a place consciously and not by default, who has looked at the limitations clearly and decided the thing is worth them. She talked about what the town had been like when she was growing up, about her father's presence in it, about the way a community that knows you completely is both a constraint and a kind of freedom. I listened without the restless edge I usually bring to other people's stillness. I found I wanted to understand it, not just receive it as data, but actually understand what it meant to be the kind of person who chooses to stay somewhere and builds a life in the staying. It was, I realized, a thing I had never done. I had arrived places, and I had left places. I had not stayed. Then she asked. She was looking at the carburetor when she said it, which I understood was deliberate, giving me the privacy of her not watching when the question landed. "What was it like," she said, "before the road?" Not what did you do or where were you. Those were the questions I'd answered a dozen times in the last week. Smoothly, with the curated version I'd been carrying since the accident. This was different. This was the question underneath those questions. And she had aimed it with the precision of someone who had been listening closely enough to know where to point. I looked at my hands on the workbench. The stool was solid under me. The garage smelled like oil and metal, and the worn flannel of a woman sitting 2 feet away. And I thought about the calibrated answer, the managed version, the one that gave just enough to seem open while keeping the real thing behind glass. I thought about that answer for approximately 4 seconds. Then I said, "It was full." My voice came out different than I intended, quieter, with something undefended in it that I didn't have time to correct. "We had a house," I said. "Claire and I. And our daughter, Maya. She was 3. I said their names. In that garage, in that quiet, I said their names out loud for the first time to someone who wasn't Dolores. And the room received them with the stillness of a room that understands what it's been handed. "The accident was on a Tuesday," I said. "I wasn't in the car. I stopped. That was all. That was the shape of it. Not the details, because the details were mine and would stay mine. but the outline, the true and irreducible outline, offered to the room and to her without management. She didn't say she was sorry. I registered this with something close to relief. I'm sorry is what people say when they don't know what else to do with your loss. And I had heard it so many times in the first months that it had become a sound without meaning, a social reflex that bounced off the surface of the thing without touching it. What she did was set down the tool she'd been holding and turn on the stool to face me and put her hand over mine on the workbench. Not a grip, just a placement. Her hand over my hand, warm and still, present with the same quality she brought to everything, completely, without performance, without asking anything back. I looked at our hands. I didn't move mine. The garage was so quiet I could hear the specific silence of the desert outside. The enormous breathing quiet of a landscape that has been here for longer than grief and will be here after it. Her hand stayed. Mine stayed. Something inside my chest, which had been a specific shape for 2 years and 3 months and 11 days, shifted very slightly. The way something shifts when it's been held in one position long enough, and someone, without announcement, gives it permission to be different. She was the one who moved first, slowly, without apology or explanation. Just the natural movement of someone who knows where the line is and respects it. She got up to get water, asked if I wanted some, and I said yes, and the moment was released back into the room as something that had existed and was now complete. We sat with the water and talked for another hour, more carefully, more lightly, with the ease of 2 people who have said something real and come out the other side. She talked about Tess, about who Tess was becoming, about the specific wonder and terror of watching a person you love develop into themselves independently of your plans for them. She talked about it the way you talk about something that amazes you every day. I asked questions because I wanted the answers, and she gave them because she trusted me with them, and somewhere in that exchange was a version of intimacy that I had not experienced in 2 years, and that arrived now, not as something I reached for, but as something that was simply there, like the light and the quiet and the hand that had been on mine. I left at 11. The walk from the garage to the diner was 40 steps. I know because I counted them without meaning to, the way your body keeps data that your brain isn't ready to file. The night was warm and enormous, and the stars were doing their extravagant thing, and I walked the 40 steps with the feeling of someone who has put something down that they've been carrying for a very long time, and whose hands don't know yet what to do with the absence of the weight. In the room, I sat on the edge of the bed with my boots on, and didn't move for a while. I thought about Claire. I thought about Maya. I did the thing I almost never allowed myself. I let the thought of them be present without immediately moving to contain it, without the highway and the speed and the forward motion I used to keep it at a manageable distance. I let it be there. It was terrible, and it was also, for the first time in a very long time, survivable in a way that didn't require me to be moving. I sat with it, and then I sat with something else. The specific warmth of a hand placed over mine without being asked, and what it had meant to be seen clearly by someone who didn't look away. I reached for my phone and did not call anyone, because there was no one to call. I sat in the quiet. After a while, I lay back and looked at the ceiling and said, to the cedar-smelling dark, 10 seconds. The duration of the hand over mine. I had counted that too, without meaning to, the way the body records what the brain isn't ready to admit matters. 10 seconds. I had needed 20 minutes to breathe correctly afterward, and I was still not entirely sure I was breathing correctly now, and that had never, not once, not with anyone, not in the 2 years of careful, detached, strategic distance, happened to me before. Never. I turned off the lamp. Outside the window, the back wall of the garage was dark now, finally. I looked at it for a moment. Then I closed my eyes and thought, I am in so much trouble. And underneath that, quieter, less managed, more true. I don't want to leave. I want to tell you that Thursday morning was normal. I want to tell you that I woke up at a reasonable hour, had coffee, processed the previous evening with the mature equanimity of a grown adult who has her emotional life organized into sensible categories, and proceeded through the day with clarity and purpose. I want to tell you that. What actually happened is that I woke up at 5:41, lay completely still for 19 minutes running the previous evening on a loop with the obsessive precision of someone reviewing security footage, got up, put on the wrong jacket, took it off, put it back on, walked into the diner, sat at the counter, and stared at the coffee Dolores put in front of me with the expression of someone who has recently been handed information their operating system wasn't built to process. Dolores looked at me for a moment, said nothing, refilled the coffee before I'd drunk enough to need a refill. This was, I had come to understand, her version of, I see you and I'm not going to make it weird. I appreciated it more than I could have articulated without embarrassing myself. The morning was complicated by the fact that everything looked different and nothing had changed. Secco was exactly the same. The street, the light, the distant sound of something agricultural happening at the edge of town. The way the heat arrived by 9 like a daily appointment. Reyes Auto had the same roll-up door, the same sign in letters that had once been red and were now the color of dried roses, the same radio going through its morning news cycle. Mara was inside doing exactly what she was always doing at this hour. Working, focused, entirely herself. Nothing was different. The difference was entirely interior, entirely mine, and it had the specific quality of a change that had been accumulating for days and had reached, the previous night, the point at which pretending otherwise was no longer a functional option. I knew this the way you know things you've been refusing to name, suddenly and completely, as if the name had always been there, just waiting for you to run out of alternatives. I was falling for her. Not the curated, managed, self-aware version of interest I'd been narrating to myself all week. The real thing. The kind that rearranges your interior without asking. I stayed at the diner until 9:30, which was later than my new routine in which Dolores noted without comment by bringing me a third coffee instead of her usual redirect toward useful activity. At 9:30, I walked to the garage with the focused neutrality of someone who has decided that nothing is different and has committed fully to that performance. Tess was there. Thursday, she had a late start, some school schedule rotation I'd learned not to question. Sitting on the Subaru hood with her granola bar in the specific position that meant she was available for conversation and was waiting to see if I would initiate it. I recognized the posture because I'd seen it every morning she'd been there before school, and I had, apparently, been paying closer attention to Tess's communication style than I'd realized. I said good morning. She said good morning. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds, which in Tess's conversational grammar was a pause with intention. You okay? She said. Fine, I said. You look like you slept weird, she said. Thanks, I said. It's not an insult, she said. Just an observation. She ate a piece of granola bar. My mom was up early too, she said, with the careful casualness of someone placing a fact on the table to see what the other person does with it. I did nothing with it. I did nothing with it so deliberately that Tess, who was watching me with the peripheral precision of a person who does this professionally, definitely noticed me doing nothing with it. I said. She said back, in an entirely different tone. Mara emerged from the back bay at 10 with grease on her forearms and the distilled focus of someone who had been inside a problem and had come out the other side of it. She looked at me. I looked at her. We said good morning to each other with the specific, careful normalcy of two people who are being normal and are both very aware of being normal and are hoping the awareness doesn't show. Tess, on the Subaru, ate her granola bar with the expression of someone watching a documentary they've already seen. Part update, Mara said. Supplier confirmed. Should be here by next Wednesday. Maybe Tuesday. Which meant 7 days. Maybe 6. The number landed in my chest with a weight that had no business being there, given that 2 weeks ago I hadn't known this town or this garage or any of the people in it existed. Good, I said, because it was the word the sentence required, and not because I meant it, and Mara said yes in the same register, and we were both very good at language in that moment, and both very aware of what we weren't saying with it. Tess finished her granola bar, folded the wrapper into a precise square, and said, I have to get to school. She hopped off the Subaru, paused next to me. You should stay, she said, in the tone of someone who is not talking about the morning. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. Mara watched her go, looked at me. She says things, she said. I know, I said. She means them, Mara said. I know that too, I said. There was a moment between us, the particular quality of a moment that is aware of itself, that both people in it recognize as significant, without having the agreement to say so directly. Mara broke it first, practically and gently, by going back to the problem she'd come out of the back bay to address, and I went to the invoicing system. And we occupied the same space with the specific charged quality of two people who have said something true to each other in the dark and are now navigating the daylight version of that truth. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was careful. Like something new that hasn't developed its full vocabulary yet and is proceeding on instinct while the words catch up. I found I could work in it. I found, more than that working in it, being useful and present and doing something real with my hands in the same space as her, was the most settled I had felt in 2 years. I noticed this with the wary attention I gave to anything that felt too good. I noticed it, and I let it be there, and I didn't immediately find a reason to leave. The representative from the auto network showed up at 11:15. I didn't know who he was when he walked in. Late 30s. Regional manager energy, the particular confidence of someone who arrives in small towns expecting to be the most prepared person in the room. He introduced himself to Mara with the practiced warmth of a man who has done this many times, referenced the offer by its formal title, said he was in the area and thought a personal visit might be helpful. Mara received him with the equanimity she brought to everything and introduced me as a consultant, which I was not technically, and which he said with complete composure, and I understood in real time that I was being kept in the room deliberately. And I straightened slightly and went into the version of myself that had existed before the road. Competent, clear, professionally present. The representative made his case. It was a good case, as cases go. Well-structured, financially sound, respectful of the history of the business while being clear about what the future under independent ownership would require. He knew his material. Mara listened without expression, which I understood as the fullest attention she could give, and which the representative probably read as resistance. At the end, he looked at me, at the consultant, and asked for her read on the proposal. I looked at Mara. She gave me the micro-signal I'd already learned to read, the slight shift in posture that meant go ahead, and I said, calmly and specifically, the offer was fair on its face, but it didn't account for the contractual limitations on independent service relationships that the network's standard agreement included, and those limitations would affect long-term revenue in ways that made the upfront number less attractive than it appeared. I had read the standard contract online 2 nights ago at midnight, sitting on the edge of my bed in the cedar-smelling room, which I was now deeply grateful for. The representative blinked, regrouped, said the contract had flexibility. I said I'd be happy to discuss which clauses specifically. He said he'd follow up. He left 20 minutes later with the slightly diminished energy of someone who had arrived expecting one kind of conversation and gotten another. Mara watched him go. Turned to me. You read the contract? She said. 2 nights ago, I said. Why? She asked. The same question she'd asked about the analysis, and I gave her the same answer I'd given then, the one that was truest without being complete. Because I wanted to be useful. She looked at me for a long moment. You are, she said, quietly, directly, like a fact. I looked at the invoicing files in my hands and thought, do not do anything with your face right now. Tess came back at 3:20 with her school bag and the particular energy of someone who has been thinking about something all day and has arrived at conclusions. She changed into work clothes, came to the parts shelf where I was finishing the reorganization, and stood next to me with the focused lateral presence of someone who is about to say something they've been composing since morning. I waited. She picked up a box of bolts, put it in the right place, picked up another. The part comes next week, she said. Tuesday or Wednesday. I know, I said. What are you going to do? She asked. I kept organizing. I don't know yet, I said, which was the honest answer, and she received it with the patience of someone who had expected exactly that. She doesn't say things directly, Tess said after a moment. My mom, she shows them. She feeds you dinner and reads your document with a pen, and she stayed up last night and she's never stayed up for anyone. She said it without drama, without pressure, just the delivery of observed data from someone with the best possible vantage point. Tess, I started. I'm not telling you what to do, she said. I'm just telling you what I see, because you might not be seeing it clearly from where you are. She put the last box on the shelf, looked at me directly, with Mara's eyes, with something in them that was entirely her own. She's careful, she said, but she's not closed. She picked up her bag and went to find her mother. Dinner that night was the four of us, as it had become. Dolores's doing, normalized through repetition, into something that felt like a thing that had always existed. Gerald was at the neighboring table and engaged Mara in a 10-minute conversation about the on-site diagnostics trial, which he'd apparently heard about from his neighbor with the ranching property, and which he was now interested in for his own vehicles. I watched Mara explain the service with the patient precision of someone who has decided to believe in something and is now operating from that belief, and I thought about the document on the kitchen table and the pen in the margins, and a woman who shows things rather than saying them. After dinner, walking back, the four of us split naturally at the corner, Tess going home, Dolores back to the diner, Mara and I continuing toward the garage in the warm dark. We walked the half-block in silence. At the garage door she stopped, turned. The light from inside caught the angle of her face, and I thought, with the specific helplessness of someone who has run out of the ability to think around a thing, she is extraordinary. Thank you, she said. For today. The representative. He'll be back, I said. Probably, she said. But not today. She looked at me with the unlatched quality, the door that wasn't open but wasn't locked. Good night, Aine, she said. Her voice in the dark, saying my name, landed exactly the way it always did, with a weight I hadn't anticipated the first time, and that I had since stopped being surprised by, and started simply receiving. Good night, I said. She went in. I stood outside for a moment. The desert night was doing everything it does. The warmth, the stars, the enormous, indifferent quiet. I stood in it and thought about 7 days, maybe 6. I thought about what Tess had said at the parts shelf. She's careful, but she's not closed. I thought about a pen in the margins and a kitchen table, and 10 seconds of a hand over mine that I had apparently decided to carry around like a physical object. I thought about Claire and Maya, and the specific shape of the future I'd been avoiding by moving, and whether standing still in Seco, Arizona, surrounded by people who had started to matter in ways I hadn't authorized, was the most terrifying thing that had happened to me since the accident, or something else entirely. Something that didn't have a word yet, but was taking shape, the way things take shape when you stop running long enough to let them. I walked back to the diner, sat on the edge of the bed, said nothing out loud this time, just sat in the quiet with everything that was true, and let it be as big as it actually was. Outside, the back wall of the garage, the light still on, someone still there, and me, here, counting days I didn't want to count, and feeling, underneath the fear, something that had no business existing in me anymore, and that was there anyway, persistent and specific and real. The desire to stay. Friday arrived with the specific quality of a day that has decided to be significant regardless of whether you're ready for it. I knew this at 6 a.m., lying in the cedar-smelling dark, in the way you know certain things before they happen. Not prescience, just the accumulated pressure of several days of unresolved tension reaching a point where something has to give. The physics of emotional situations are not so different from mechanical ones. Mara would have a word for that. I thought about Mara having a word for that, which was itself information about my current state that I filed under the growing category of things that would have been inconceivable 2 weeks ago. I got up, put on the right jacket on the first try, which felt like progress. Walked into the diner. Dolores put coffee in front of me and said, "Big day." Not a question, not an explanation, just the pronouncement of a woman who reads mornings the way other people read weather. "Why do you say that?" I asked. "Because you're wearing the good jacket," she said, and went back to the grill. I looked down at my jacket. It was, objectively, the better of the two I'd brought. I had not consciously registered choosing it. "Dolores," I said. "You're unsettling," I said. "I know," she said, with the serenity of someone who has been told this before and considers it a compliment. I had spent Thursday night finishing the full strategy document, not the preliminary 11 pages I'd printed on the broken inkjet, but the complete version, the one with the market analysis expanded, the financial modeling refined, the mobile diagnostic service plan built out into a 12-month projection with 3 scenarios: conservative, moderate, and optimistic. I had also, in a separate section that I'd added at midnight and debated removing twice, outlined a social media positioning strategy for Reyes Auto that was specific enough to implement without outside help and simple enough that Tess could run it after 30 minutes of instruction. I'd printed it this morning, 23 pages, the inkjet still complaining but functional, the margin slightly less skewed than the first time. I'd paper-clipped it in the upper left corner with a clip from the same jar. Some things deserve consistency. I picked it up from the counter where Dolores had left it without comment, squared the pages and thought, "This is everything I know how to give." Which was true professionally and also true in ways that extended considerably beyond professional, and I was aware of both layers simultaneously and had decided, sometime around 2 a.m, that being aware was enough for now. The giving was the thing. The rest would be what it would be. Mara was at the front workbench when I arrived, doing the end-of-week inventory with the methodical precision of someone who has done it every Friday for 4 years and has a system that works and doesn't need improving. She looked up when I came in. I put the document on the workbench, to the side, not on top, same placement as before, and said, "The complete version. Everything." She looked at it. 23 pages, slightly skewed, upper left paperclip. She looked at me. "Everything," she said. "The mobile service plan is built out to a year," I said. 3 scenarios. The social media section is in the back. Tess can run it. I wrote it for her specifically. Something moved across Mara's expression, brief and complex. The kind of thing that happens on a face when it receives something larger than it was prepared for and has to redistribute the weight. She picked up the document, set it down, picked it up again. "I'll read it," she said, and I heard the difference from the first time she'd said that. The kitchen table and the pen in the margins. Yes, but also something in the register of the words themselves. Something that was less procedural and more personal. "I know you will," I said. She looked at me for a moment, went back to the inventory. The representative came back at 11, as I'd predicted. He arrived with a revised version of the offer, marginally better terms, a small concession on one of the contract clauses I'd flagged, the practiced flexibility of someone who has been told to close this one. He was professional about it. He made his case well. Mara listened with the complete attention she brought to everything, asked 2 questions that were precise and intelligent, and that I could tell caught him slightly off guard, and then said she needed time to review the revised terms before responding. He said he understood, said the deadline on the original timeline still stood, a week from Monday, and that he hoped they could reach an agreement. He shook Mara's hand, shook mine, with the slight hesitation of someone still not entirely sure of my role in this room. Left. Mara stood at the garage entrance watching his car pull away with her arms crossed and her weight on one foot, and the expression of someone who was looking at a thing and seeing something beyond it at the same time. "The concession is real," I said. "I know," she said. "It doesn't change the fundamental math." "I know," she said again. "So you're going to turn it down," I said. It wasn't a question. She turned to look at me. "I was always going to turn it down," she said. "I just needed to know I had a reason that wasn't just stubbornness." She said it with the directness that was entirely her. No self-deprecation, no performance, just the clean acknowledgement of a thing she'd known about herself and was naming without shame. "The plan gives you the reason," I said. "Yes," she said. And then, a beat later, "You gave me the reason." Quietly, directly, looking at me with the unlatched door quality, except, and I noticed this with every cell of my attention, it was slightly more open than it had been. Not all the way, but more. Tess came at 3:20 with her school bag and her schedule precision and the particular energy of someone who has been tracking the day from a distance and has arrived to find it proceeding according to her assessment. She changed into work clothes, found me at the parts shelf, and said, without preamble, "He came back." "At 11, I said. "Mom told me." She put a box of nuts in the right place. "She's going to turn it down," she said. "I know," I said. "How do you feel about that?" she asked, with the directness that was her most consistent quality. I considered the question. "Relieved," I said. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." A pause. She put another box in another right place with the focused economy of someone who is building to a different point through the practical ones. "The part might come Tuesday," she said. "The supplier called this morning." "I heard," I said, which was not entirely true. I'd heard Mara mention it in passing, and had spent 20 minutes after that pretending I hadn't heard it the way I'd heard it. "Tuesday," Tess said again, as if the repetition was the point. 4 days. She looked at me with the patient, clear regard of someone who has said what she came to say, and is waiting for acknowledgement that it was received. 4 days, I confirmed. She nodded once and went to find her mother. The afternoon had the quality of a thing aware of its own duration, the specific texture of time when you are conscious of its limits. I worked at the invoicing system, which was now almost entirely functional, and which had become, I realized, my reason to be there on the days when I had no other reason, and which would not exist as a reason for much longer. Mara moved through the garage with her usual purposeful ease, and occasionally said something practical to me or to Tess, and the 3 of us occupied the space with the familiar ease of a thing that had been built over 9 days from nothing, and that felt, impossibly, like it had always existed. I had been in cities for 2 years. I had been in hotel rooms and diners and the specific non-space of a motorcycle on an open highway. I had not been in a place. Not in the way that this had become a place. Specific and warm, and populated with people who had started as strangers, and were now something that I didn't have a word for, that was bigger than acquaintances, and more complicated than friends. And that occupied, in the architecture of my interior, rooms I hadn't opened in 2 years and 3 months and some days. Dinner was loud and comfortable, and full of Gerald, who had apparently decided that our table was also his table, and who had strong opinions about a road construction project 3 miles out of town that had been discussed at every meal for a week, and showed no signs of resolution. Dolores managed the conversation with the authority of an air traffic controller, redirecting, timing, allowing the right things to land. Tess ate her food and read under the table, which Mara noticed and chose not to address, which told me something about the specific negotiations of their relationship that I found, honestly, beautiful. At some point, Mara looked across the table at me with the particular look that I had learned was hers alone. Direct and warm and careful, all three at once. And I looked back, and neither of us said anything, and the moment existed in the full awareness of both of us. And then Gerald said something about asphalt, and the moment folded itself back into the evening without disappearing. Tess, under the table, was definitely not reading her book. After dinner, walking back, Tess went home early. Homework, same resignation as always, but with an extra beat of significance in the goodbye that I registered clearly. Dolores lingered at the diner door, said goodnight with the expression of a woman who knows exactly what is about to happen in the next 5 minutes, and has the decency not to narrate it. Mara and I walked the half-block to the garage in the warm dark, and at the garage door she stopped and turned and said, "Come in for a minute." Not a question. Not uncertain. The invitation of someone who has decided something and is acting from the decision. I went in. The garage in the evening had its own quality. The overhead lights creating warmth where the daytime sun created clarity. The shadows at the edges of the bays softer and more interior. Mara stood at the center workbench and looked at me with the fullest version of the look I'd been learning all week. And I understood that we were in a different kind of moment than the previous evenings. Not because anything external had changed, but because something between us had reached the point where moving around it required more effort than moving through it. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay," I said. "And I want you to answer it true," she said. "Not managed. Not the version you give people when you don't want them too close." I felt that land with the precision of something aimed by someone who knows their target. "Okay," I said again. She looked at me steadily. "What are you going to do?" she said. "When the part comes?" The question was simple. It was also the most complex thing anyone had said to me in 2 years, because it was not really about the motorcycle, and we both knew it was not really about the motorcycle. And the room was holding both the surface question and the real one in the same breath and waiting for me to answer both. I looked at her. I thought about the managed answer, the one that kept the exit clear, that didn't promise what I wasn't sure I could deliver, that protected both of us from the specific vulnerability of wanting something from another person. I had that answer ready. I had been carrying it like a contingency plan since day 4, when I'd started to understand that a contingency plan was going to be necessary. I looked at the answer. I looked at Mara. I said, "I don't want to go." 4 words, completely unmanaged, arriving in the room with the specific weight of a truth that has been waiting longer than 9 days to be said. "I don't want to go," I said again, because the first time had surprised even me, and I needed to hear myself mean it twice. "And I know that's not a plan," I said. "I know I don't know how to stay. I know I have things I'm still—" I stopped. Started again with the only words that were true. "I don't want to go," I said, "and I don't know what comes after that. But I know that it's true." Mara looked at me for a long moment. The garage was so quiet I could hear the desert outside. Then she crossed the space between us, not quickly, not dramatically, with the deliberate and certain movement of someone who has made a choice and is honoring it. And she was standing in front of me, close enough that I could see the specific quality of her dark eyes, which were warm and careful, and for the first time since I'd walked into this garage 9 days ago, fully open. She put her hand on the side of my face, her palm against my cheek, warm and still. I put my hand over hers. Neither of us moved for a moment. The moment was complete and whole and entirely sufficient, and neither of us rushed it. Then she leaned in, and I met her, and the kiss was the kind that doesn't announce itself, that arrives as the natural conclusion of everything that has been building. quiet and certain and warm, with the specific quality of something true rather than something performed. Brief enough to be a beginning, present enough to be real. I pulled back first, not away, just to the distance of looking at her clearly, her hand still on my face, mine still over hers. "I don't know what I'm offering," I said quietly. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you that anyway." "I know," she said again. "Mara." "Ane," she said, with a patience and a warmth that was entirely hers, the particular quality of a woman who has chosen carefully and is at peace with the choice. "I know." From outside the garage, from the direction of the street, improbably close, came the sound of Tess's voice, clear and carrying in the quiet night. "Finally," and then footsteps, retreating, with the particular rhythm of someone who has confirmed what they came to confirm, and is leaving with dignity. Mara closed her eyes, opened them. The corner of her mouth moved into something that was, undeniably, a smile. "She was supposed to be doing homework," she said. "She was," I said. "She just finished early." The smile reached her eyes, and I thought, standing in that garage in Seco, Arizona, with the desert night outside, and the overhead lights making everything warm, and the specific gravity of a woman who had made me feel off balance for 9 straight days, I thought, this is the thing. This is exactly the thing I have been running from, and exactly the thing I needed to stop running from, and I am terrified, and I am here, and I am not, for the first time in 2 years, looking for the exit. Saturday morning arrived differently. Not in any way I could have pointed to on a map or measured with an instrument. The light was the same light, the heat was the same heat, the diner smelled like coffee and the garage smelled like oil, and Seco was exactly as it had always been. The difference was entirely interior, which is the only kind of difference that actually counts. I woke up at 6 without the weight. That's the only way I know to describe it. The specific heaviness that had lived in my chest for 2 years and 3 months and some days, the one I'd built an entire lifestyle around accommodating, the one that required constant forward motion to keep at a manageable distance. I woke up and it wasn't gone. I want to be honest about that. Because grief doesn't evaporate overnight, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But it had shifted. The way a thing shifts when it's been held in one position for too long, and someone, without announcement, gives it permission to be different. I lay in the cedar-smelling quiet and thought about Claire. I thought about Maya. I let the thought be present and complete and real. And it was devastating, and it was also, for the first time, something I could hold without being destroyed by holding it. I lay there for a while, doing that. Then I got up, put on the right jacket without thinking about it, walked into the diner. Dolores was behind the counter. She looked at me when I came through the door. One long, complete look, the kind she deployed when she was reading something that required full attention. And then she smiled. Not the knowing smile she'd been using all week. The one that said, I see exactly what's happening here, and I'm being tactful about it. This was different, warmer, quieter. The smile of someone who has been hoping for a specific outcome, and is seeing it, and is, in the most private and genuine way, glad. She put coffee in front of me. I sat. You look different, she said. I feel different, I said. Because with Dolores, the managed answer was always more effort than it was worth. Good different? She asked. I thought about it. Yeah, I said. Good different. She nodded once, with the finality of someone filing a thing as resolved, and went back to the grill. The eggs that appeared in front of me 10 minutes later were better than usual, which I didn't think was possible, and which I chose to interpret as Dolores's version of a celebration. I ate them in the particular contented quiet of a person who has put something down and is still getting used to the lightness. I went to the garage at 9. Mara was alone. Tess had mentioned a school thing the previous evening with the vagueness teenagers use for events they've agreed to attend, but don't want to over-explain. The garage had its morning quality. The radio on news, the light through the high windows landing in the same places it always landed. Mara looked up when I came in. The look was different from every previous version of it. The professional assessment gone, the careful middle gone, the unlatched door gone. It was just her, looking at me, with the specific quality of someone who has made a decision in the full knowledge of what the decision costs and has made it anyway. I felt it like a physical thing. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I said. I went to the workbench. She went back to what she was doing. We occupied the same space with the ease of the previous days, and also with something added. Something that had been in the room all week without permission, and was now there with it, which changed the quality of everything without changing the surface of anything. The radio cycled through the news. The light moved. Somewhere outside, a truck went by. It was, I thought, extraordinary. The ordinariness of it. The fact that everything looked exactly the same and was entirely different. I had not known that was a thing you could have. At 10:15, Mara's phone rang. She answered with the short, professional greeting she used for the shop line, and I watched her face go through a sequence I'd become good at reading. Attention, processing, recalibration. She asked 2 questions. Listened. Said thank you and hung up. She set the phone down on the workbench and looked at it for a moment before she looked at me. "The part," she said. "It's coming Monday." Her voice was level, informational, giving me the fact cleanly, without the weight she had to know it carried. "Monday," I said. Not a question, just the word, landing in the room between us with everything it contained. 3 days, maybe less, depending on the delivery. 3 days, and the motorcycle would be functional and the technical reason for being in Seco. Arizona would be resolved, and I would be standing in front of the open road with everything I'd arrived with, and everything I hadn't arrived with, and a decision that had been theoretical until this moment, and was now entirely concrete. "Monday," she said again. Confirmation. Then, "You knew it was coming." "I knew," I said. "Does it change anything?" she asked, and I recognized the question. The same quality as last night's question, the surface and the real thing held together in the same breath, delivered with the directness of someone who needs the true answer and trusts that she'll get it. "No," I said. "It doesn't change anything." She held my gaze for a moment, nodded, went back to work. I stood at the workbench and breathed and thought, okay. 3 days. That's fine. 3 days is enough to figure out what comes next. I thought that very firmly. Then I spent 20 minutes doing inventory I'd already done, because my hands needed something to do while my brain ran its calculations. Tess came back at noon. School thing apparently resolved. With the specific satisfied energy of someone who has received information and has come home to be present for what happens next. She dropped her bag, changed with her usual speed, and came directly to where I was standing at the parts shelf with the unerring precision of a 15-year-old who always knows exactly where the important thing is happening. She stood next to me, said nothing for a moment, picked up a bolt, put it in the right place. "The part comes Monday," she said. "I know," I said. "Mom told you. This morning." She put another bolt in another right place with the focused economy of someone who is organizing more than hardware. "So," she said. "So," I said. She looked at me then, directly, with Mara's eyes and something in them that was entirely her own. A particular quality of 15-year-old honesty that doesn't soften things because it hasn't yet learned to consider whether softening is sometimes kind. "What are you going to do?" she asked. And there it was, the same question Mara had asked last night, in the same garage with the same weight. Except from Tess, it had a different layer, because Tess was not just a person I'd come to care about. Tess was someone who had already lost people, and who was asking the question with the specific investment of someone who has skin in the answer. I put down the box I was holding, turned to face her fully, because she deserved that. The full attention, the real answer, not the side-of-the-face version I'd been giving most of the important things in my life for 2 years. "I'm not going to disappear," I said. "That's not an answer," she said, without heat. "No," I said. "It's not. I know." I looked at the shelf, the organized, labeled, functional shelf that had been chaos 9 days ago, and was now a thing that worked. "I told your mom last night that I don't want to go," I said. "I know," Tess said. "She told me." Which surprised me enough that I looked at her. Mara had told her. Which meant Mara had processed the previous evening by talking to her daughter. Which meant it was real enough to warrant processing out loud. Which meant something about the weight Mara was giving it that I hadn't fully accounted for. "She told you," I said. "She doesn't tell me things about... she doesn't usually..." "I know," Tess said, with the patience of someone managing my slower processing speed. "That's why I'm telling you she told me." She let that sit for a moment. "She doesn't know how to ask you to stay," she said. "She doesn't do that. She doesn't ask people for things she can't guarantee she deserves." Her voice was steady and precise, and it was also, underneath the precision, the voice of a 15-year-old who has watched her mother carry things alone for a very long time, and has very specific feelings about it that she is currently deploying with considerable courage. "Tess," I said. "I'm not telling you what to do," she said, same as Thursday. "I'm just..." She stopped, started again. "She read your document 3 times, she said. "The new one. Last night and this morning. I saw it on the kitchen table with the pen marks." She picked up the last bolt, put it in the right place. "The pen marks were different this time," she said. "More of them." And she was smiling while she read it. She put the empty box on the pile, looked at me one more time, with the clear and uncomplicated directness of someone who has said everything they came to say. "Okay," she said, and went to find her mother. I stood at the parts shelf for a while after she left. The shelf was done, every box in its right place, every label facing outward, the whole thing functional and clear and finished. There was nothing left to organize. I looked at it and thought about what Tess had said, the pen marks, and the smiling and Mara telling her daughter a thing she hadn't told anyone in a long time, and the particular courage it took to be a person who shows things instead of saying them when the thing you're showing is this large and this vulnerable and this possible to lose. I thought about Claire, which I did now without the door slamming, gently, with the specific tenderness of someone learning to carry a thing differently. I thought about what it meant to have loved someone completely and lost them completely, and to be standing here, in this garage, in this town that was not my town, feeling something that was unmistakably real and that I had specifically designed my entire last 2 years to prevent. I thought about the road, the 22 states and the 40 motels and the movement that I'd believed was the same as surviving, and that had been, I understood now with complete clarity, just a very long and very expensive way of not being anywhere. The road had kept me alive. It had also kept me empty. And I was standing in the fullest place I'd been in 2 years and 3 months and some days. And Monday was 3 days away. And I needed to figure out what I was made of. I found Dolores at the diner counter at 2 o'clock, the afternoon lull, the diner quiet, in the particular way it got between the lunch rush and the dinner setup. She was doing the accounts, paper ledger, pen, the analog system of a woman who trusts what she can touch. She looked up when I sat down. Didn't say anything. Put coffee in front of me. I wrapped both hands around it and said, "The part comes Monday." "I know," she said. "Mara called me this morning." Of course she had. I looked at the coffee. "I don't know how to stay somewhere," I said. I haven't done it in 2 years. I'm not sure I remember how." Dolores set her pen down, folded her hands on the ledger, gave me the full attention that she'd been giving me in pieces all week, and was now apparently delivering all at once. "You've been staying here for 9 days, she said. "You wake up early, you show up, you do the work, you sit at the table." She said it plainly, without the warmth she usually laced things with. Just the facts, delivered as facts. "That's what staying is," she said. "It's not a skill you learn. It's a decision you make. Every day." She picked up her pen. "You already know how," she said. "You've been doing it." She went back to the ledger. I sat with the coffee and with that, and thought about every morning I'd woken up before 6 in a cedar-smelling room, and every walk to a garage I had no reason to go to, and every hour I'd spent making myself useful in a place that hadn't asked for me and that I had stayed in anyway, every day, without a plan. Just the daily decision to be present in the specific place where something real was happening. Dolores was right. I had been staying. I just hadn't called it that. Sunday was the 3 of us. Mara had closed the garage at noon, which she apparently did on Sundays after the morning's work, and Tess had materialized with a suggestion about a place 20 minutes outside Seco, where the desert did something specific with the light in the late afternoon that was worth seeing. We drove in Mara's truck, Tess in the back, me in the passenger seat, Mara driving with the easy competence of someone who knows every road in a 100-mile radius. The place Tess had in mind was a low mesa at the edge of a dry wash, accessible by a dirt track that the truck handled without complaint. We got out and stood at the edge of the mesa, and the desert did exactly what Tess had promised. The late afternoon light coming across the red rock in a way that made the shadows precise and the colors impossible, everything rendered in the specific clarity of a landscape that has no interest in being anything other than exactly what it is. We stood there for a while in the easy silence of people who have learned each other's quiet. Tess went to look at something at the edge of the wash with the focused curiosity of a person who finds the world genuinely interesting. Mara stood next to me, close enough that our arms were touching, and looked at the desert with the expression she wore when she was somewhere she loved. "It's beautiful," I said. "Yes," she said. She looked at me then, at the exact angle that the light was doing its specific thing. "Stay," she said. One word, quietly, without drama. The most direct thing she had said in 9 days of showing instead of saying, delivered now with the full weight of a person who does not ask for things lightly and has asked anyway. I looked at her, at the desert, at Tess crouched at the edge of the wash, interested in something small and specific and alive, at the truck on the dirt track and the sky going orange and pink with the extravagance the Arizona sky reserves for moments that are already too much. "Okay," I said. "Just that." One word back. She nodded once, not with relief, but with the steadiness of someone receiving something they chose to believe in before they had proof. Tess, 20 feet away without looking up from whatever she'd found at the edge of the wash, said, "Finally." We both looked at her. She held up a small, smooth stone and examined it with great interest. "Nice rock," she said, and pocketed it, and we all stood there in the impossible light, and I thought, This is what I was running from, and this is what I was running toward, and they were always the same thing. Monday came the way endings come when you've been dreading them long enough that the dread has become its own kind of companion. Suddenly, and without the courtesy of feeling different from any other morning. The light was the same light. The heat was the same heat gathering itself at the edges of the day. The coffee Dolores put in front of me was the same coffee, and the diner smelled the same. And outside the window, Seco was doing exactly what it always did in the early morning, which was existing with the unhurried certainty of a place that has been here long enough to stop needing to prove it. I sat at the counter and held the mug with both hands and thought, today the part arrives. I thought it clearly and completely, and without the flinching quality that the thought had carried since Saturday. Because I had said okay on a mesa in the late afternoon light, and meant it with every part of myself I had access to, and meaning something completely is a different experience than meaning it partially, which is the only way I had meant things for 2 years. It felt like standing on solid ground after a long time on a boat. Slightly strange. Completely right. Dolores came to refill my coffee and stopped next to me and said, without preamble, "How are you?" Not the social version. The real question, aimed with the precision she brought to everything important. I considered it the way it deserved to be considered. "Scared," I said. "And okay." She nodded. "Those go together more often than people think," she said. She refilled the coffee, went back to the grill. I thought about that. Scared and okay, the two things occupying the same space without canceling each other out, which was, I was coming to understand, what most true things felt like. Not clean and resolved and comfortable. Just real, with all the texture that real things have. I had spent 2 years trying to get to a place where things felt clean and resolved, and what I'd gotten instead was numb and moving, which is not the same thing at all, and which I had confused for the same thing because confusion was easier than the alternative. The alternative was this: sitting in a diner in Seco, Arizona, scared and okay, waiting for a motorcycle part, and a future I hadn't planned and couldn't entirely see, and was choosing anyway. The part arrived at 11:17. I know the exact time because I was at the garage when the delivery truck pulled up. I had been there since 9, doing the last of the invoicing work. The final pieces of the system I'd been building for a week and a half that was now, genuinely, complete. Mara signed for the delivery with the professional efficiency of someone receiving a business component, and the driver left, and she carried the part inside and set it on the workbench and looked at it with the specific expression of a person regarding something that is simultaneously good news and complicated news. I looked at it too. It was smaller than I'd expected, which parts always are when you realize how much weight you've been assigning them. "I can have it installed by this afternoon," she said. 4, maybe 5 o'clock. "Okay," I said. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Not because there was nothing to say, but because what needed to be said was already present in the room in the way that some things are, fully and without requiring language to establish them. Then she picked up the part and went to work, and I went back to the invoicing system. And the garage had its late morning quality, the radio on music now, the light through the high windows moving with the unhurried certainty of a day that knows exactly how long it has. I finished the invoicing system at noon, sat back in the chair at the workbench, looked at what was on the screen, and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing that had been broken and was now functional. Not perfect, systems never are, but organized and clear and connected to itself in the ways it needed to be connected. I had built something here. Not just the invoicing system, the strategy document, the mobile diagnostics plan, the social media framework for Tess. Concrete things that would continue after I stopped being physically present. That would work without me the way good work always does. I had not built anything in 2 years. I had moved through things, occupied them briefly, left them as I found them, or close to it. The idea of leaving something behind that was better than I found it was, I realized, what I had been before the accident. The version of myself that made things and gave them to people, and trusted that the giving was worth the risk of caring. I had not trusted that in 2 years. I was starting to again, and it felt like a muscle that has been unused, tender and uncertain, and also, unmistakably, alive. Tess arrived at 3:20. She came directly to the workbench where I was sitting, dropped her bag, looked at the part installed in the motorcycle bay where Mara was doing the final work, looked at me. Her expression was the most complex I'd seen on her face. The 15 layers of a person who has decided something, and is managing the feelings that came with the decision with more grace than most adults could. "It's almost done," she said. "Yeah," I said. She sat on the stool next to mine. Her stool, I'd started thinking of it. Same as mine, and looked at the motorcycle with the focused neutrality of someone looking at a thing and seeing past it. "You said okay," she said. "On the mesa." "I did," I said. "I meant it." She looked at me. "I know," she said. She stopped. The focused neutrality cracked slightly, just at the edges, the way things crack in 15-year-olds when they're being braver than they feel. "I know what it means when people say they'll stay, and then they don't," she said, quietly. Without accusation, just the clean statement of a fact learned early and carried since. I felt it land in exactly the place it was aimed at, which was the center of everything I'd been sitting with for 4 days. I turned to face her fully, the way she deserved. "Tess," I said, "I know I'm a stranger who showed up with a broken motorcycle and no plan," I said. "I know that's not a resume for someone you should trust with something important." She was looking at me with the direct and patient attention she brought to things she was taking seriously. "But I'm not going to tell you I'll stay and then not stay," I said. "I don't know exactly what staying looks like yet. I don't have the whole plan, but I have." I stopped, found the right words. "I have more reason to be here than I've had anywhere in 2 years, and I'm not someone who walks away from a reason." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, with the deliberate quality of someone making a decision about trust that they intend to stand behind. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. She picked up her bag. "I'm going to help Mom finish," she said. "Good," I said. She went. I sat at the workbench in the afternoon light and breathed and thought. I meant every word of that. Which was, I realized, the point. At 4:47, Mara came to find me at the workbench and said, "It's done." 2 words, everything in them. I got up and followed her to the bay where the Triumph sat. Fully assembled, serviced, the work clean and precise in the way everything Mara did was clean and precise. I looked at it. It looked exactly as it had when I'd arrived, which made sense mechanically and felt strange personally, because I was looking at it as if it were the same object, and it was the same object, and everything around it was different. "You want to take it out?" she asked. "Test the repair?" I looked at the motorcycle, looked at her. "Not today," I said. She held my gaze. "No? Not today," I said. "Today I want to have dinner with your daughter and your aunt, and then I want to talk to you about what comes next." I said it plainly, without the managed quality I'd been deploying less and less, and that was now almost entirely absent from the way I spoke to her, because managing things around Mara had become, over 10 days, simply too much effort, and also not what I wanted. She looked at me for a moment. "What does come next?" she said. "I don't have all of it," I said. "I have some of it." "Tell me the sum," she said. I took a breath. "I have skills that are useful to you right now," I said. "The mobile service launch is going to need someone in the first 3 months who can handle the marketing side while you handle the operational side. I can do that remotely, partly, but remote doesn't work for everything." She was listening with the full attention. "I need to go back to where I left my life," I said. "There are things I put down when I got on the road. Things I need to pick back up and deal with and close properly. That's going to take some time. A few weeks, maybe a month." I looked at her steadily. "And then I want to come back," I said. "Not because the motorcycle broke down, because I'm choosing to." Her expression moved through several things I watched with my full attention. She was processing it the way she processed everything, completely, without rush, giving it the space it deserved. "A month," she said. "Maybe a little more," I said. "But I'd call," I said. "And Tess has my number. She's had it since day 3. She got it from my phone while I was under the Subaru, and I let her keep it because I wanted her to have it." Something that was unmistakably a smile moved across Mara's face. "She told me," she said. Of course she did, I said. The smile reached her eyes. A month, she said again. And then you come back. And then I come back, I said. And we figure out the rest from there. She nodded slowly, with the steadiness of someone who has decided to believe in a thing and is committing to the belief fully rather than halfway. She crossed the space between us and put her hand on the side of my face, same as Friday, warm and still and present. I put my hand over hers. Don't make me wait more than a month, she said. I won't, I said. She leaned in and I met her, and the kiss was longer this time and warmer, and carried everything that 10 days in Seco had built between two people who had started as a broken motorcycle and a professional assessment, and had arrived here, in this garage bay, in this light, with this much to carry forward. From the garage entrance came the sound of Tess, who had been very quiet for someone known for the opposite. I'm going to the diner, she announced to the general air. Dolores is making something good. You should come when you're done. A pause. Take your time, she added, with the elaborate casualness of someone who has timed an exit with great care. Footsteps. Gone. Mara pulled back to the distance of looking at me clearly. Her eyes were warm and open and certain, the full version of her, undone and present. She planned that, she said. Absolutely, I said. She's been planning the whole thing, Mara said. Probably since day 2, I said. Mara shook her head with the specific fond exasperation of a parent who knows exactly who their child is and loves them completely for it. She took my hand. We walked to the diner. Dinner was everything it had become in 10 days, and also its own thing. Fuller, louder, the specific warmth of people who know something good has happened and are celebrating it in the way of people who don't make a production of celebrations, which is the best kind. Gerald was there, at his neighboring table, talking about the road construction with undiminished conviction. Dolores moved through the room with the authority of a conductor at the performance she's been rehearsing for a week. Tess ate her food with the satisfied composure of someone whose plan has executed correctly and who is being gracious enough not to say so explicitly. Under the table, at some point, Mara's hand found mine, and stayed. I looked at the room, the specific warmth of it, the realness, the 4 people in it who had been strangers to me 10 days ago and were not strangers now and would not be strangers in a month when I came back. And I felt something that I had not felt in 2 years and 3 months and some days. Not happiness exactly, because happiness is too simple a word for something this complicated and this hard won. Something more like wholeness, the returning of a thing that had been lost in such totality that I'd stopped believing it still existed somewhere to be returned. After dinner, I walked back to the diner room alone. Mara had things to close up. Tess had homework with the same resignation as always. Dolores had her after-hours accounting, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the cedar-smelling room and looked at the motorcycle helmet sitting on the chair by the window and thought about everything I was going to do in the next month. There was a storage unit in Tucson with boxes I'd never unpacked from the house. There were phone calls I'd been avoiding for a year. There were people who had tried to stay in my life and who I had, through the logistics of constant movement, allowed to drift, because drifting was easier than the alternative. There was a grief counselor I'd seen twice, and canceled 3 times, who had left her number in my phone with a message that said, "When you're ready and who I was, I understood now. Finally ready to call." There was a life that I had put down in pieces, and that I had not been able to pick back up from the road, and that I could, from a place with solid ground under it, begin to reassemble. Not the old life. That was gone and would stay gone, and I had made a kind of peace with that in a garage in Seco on a Wednesday night with 10 seconds of a hand over mine. A new one, built from what remained and what had been found. I picked up my phone, opened a new note, wrote at the top, "What comes next?" And then I wrote the list. Not the escape plan. Not the itinerary for the next city. not the logistics of being somewhere temporarily. The list of what it means to be somewhere permanently, the boxes, the phone calls, the counselor, the things to close and the things to open and the things to carry differently. It was a long list. I wrote it all the way to the end without stopping, and at the bottom I wrote, "Come back to Seco. Figure out the rest from there." I looked at the list for a while. Then I looked out the window at the back wall of the garage, dark now, the day closed. The stars over Seco were doing their extravagant thing. The impossible quantity of them, the indifferent enormity, the specific beauty of a sky that has no interest in being witnessed, and is witnessed anyway. I had ridden into this town with the certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose and nothing left to want. I had been wrong about both. The losing had not, it turned out, taken everything. It had taken the specific things it took and left the rest, and the rest included the capacity for this. For a garage in the desert, and a woman who reads things with a pen at the kitchen table, and a 15-year-old who pockets smooth stones and plans things with the confidence of someone who has decided the outcome in advance. It included Dolores's coffee and Gerald's road opinions, and the specific quality of the light at 4 p.m. when it comes through high windows at the right angle. It included the person I was when I stopped moving long enough to remember who that was. Here is what I know now, narrating this to you at whatever hour you're listening, in whatever place you are. Grief is not a thing you outrun. I tried for 2 years, and I can tell you with complete authority that the math does not work, that the highway does not go far enough, that there is no speed at which you stop being the person something happened to. What you can do. What I didn't know I was doing when the motorcycle died on the side of a desert road, and a camper truck smelled like beef jerky, and a woman in coveralls looked at me with professional assessment and zero personal interest. What you can do is stop, and be somewhere, and let the somewhere matter. And trust that the mattering, even though it's terrifying, even though everything you've ever loved has shown you that it can be taken, is still the only thing worth doing with the time you have. The motorcycle was ready. The road was there. It would always be there. That was the thing about roads. They were extraordinarily patient. But I was not getting on it tonight. Tonight I was in Seco, Arizona, in a cedar-smelling room with a list on my phone, and a woman 2 blocks over who had said, "Don't make me wait more than a month," with the voice of someone who has decided to believe in something. And I was going to make sure she didn't have to. I turned off the lamp, lay back, looked at the ceiling in the dark, and for the first time in 2 years and 3 months and some days, I did not count the miles to the next place. I thought about the miles back. I thought about what was here, and what would be here when I returned, and I let that be the last thing in my mind before I slept. Not the road ahead, but the place I was already planning to come back to. Not running. Not even standing still. Something new. Something I didn't have a word for yet, and didn't need one. Just this. The quiet decision, made in the dark, to be someone who stays. And that's the whole story. If you made it to the end, thank you. Drop a comment telling me which part got you, because I need to know I'm not the only one who lost it a little bit, somewhere around chapter 6. And if you're new here and this is the first story you found, welcome. There are more where this came from. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you in the next story.